Tonight on Free Minds TV, who do you trust with your personal information? Well, I wouldn't trust the government. We're going to be getting into a couple of stories, including one about the government actually posting social security numbers on their government websites, as well as, well, they've lost another computer with all sorts of personal identification involved in it with no encryption. We're going to be getting into that, the downsizer dispatch, and a whole lot more, all tonight on Free Minds TV. And welcome to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
All right, we're going to be getting into a few articles having to do with identity and the government's, well, they're just utter inability to keep track of important information, information that really could screw someone over if they lost it, social security numbers, stuff that identity thieves are really looking for. Well, the government just seems to be giving it away. We're going to be getting into those articles in the second half of tonight's show. But first we've been sticking with a little bit of a China topic going on there, the Olympics, bringing them into the spotlight. Tons of stuff going on there, so we're going to get into that article. I'd also like to welcome the viewers up in Laconia in the Lakes region. Welcome, this is the first time the episode's premiering up there, so we're on a few different stations in New Hampshire. Thank you to Renee for helping us getting on there. I think covers about 6 to 10 towns up there. So welcome to you guys. If this is the first time seeing us, well, we might be a little bit different from the normal news commentary you see because we're not Republicans, we're not Democrats. We're something in the middle, but not moderates either. So stay tuned, give it a couple episodes, and see what you think. But let's get right into it. Nick, what's going on in China this week? What's the article that we're going to be covering?
Well, China has promised that they're going to allow free and open media coverage of the Olympics and what's going on in China during the Games. That was a promise they had made when they were going for the bid to have the Olympics in Beijing, and it's something they've said they would honor up to this point. Well, it hasn't worked out that way. China's already apologizing for police beating Japanese journalists who were covering the grenade attack in one of the western provinces of China. There was an attack on a group of police officers in western China by the Uyghur people. They're a minority group in China, and there is a separatist movement among them. They're a minority Muslim population within China, and there is a movement to create an independent state in Western China. Unfortunately, it resulted in violence in the form of terrorism, but these Japanese journalists were simply taking pictures on the street where the grenade attack had occurred days after the fact. This wasn't in the heat of the moment. This was days after the fact. Paramilitary police arrested them, kicked them to the ground, beat them, actually, standing on their faces with combat boots and damaging the camera, basically breaking the camera. And these Japanese journalists were held for a couple of days. They were from the Nippon News Network in Japan, and police are apologizing at this point, as is the government of China, but the government of Japan is obviously not pleased, and I'm sure these journalists aren't either. But it's unfortunate, but it's not really surprising that there isn't really a free press in China, and they have trouble respecting it.
Well, it seems over here in the United States we have a really lazy press, a press that doesn't really want to dig into the tougher issues and call out the government for being horrible in certain cases and not doing their jobs in other cases. Our government seems to be lazy. I mean, our press seems to be a little bit lazy. Our government's lazy, of course, too, but the press is really lazy over here, doesn't want to get into the issues. Well, it could be, I guess, worse, because in China, if they're getting into the issues, which a lot of them are trying to do, they're getting arrested in a lot of cases, too. We've been covering a few different articles that are similar to this, where journalists over in China are in jail. They can go in jail for many, many years just for talking out against the government. So it's not a very good situation, especially with the what's going on with the Olympics. There's no journalistic freedom over there. They still, if they want to jump on the internet, it's restricted. More stuff that China said they would not do when the Olympics got there. And I think this show's premiering when the Olympics are starting. So welcome Olympics, and welcome to the Red China, the communist state, just a step or two ahead of us here in the United United States.
Well, some people would argue that it's a couple steps ahead, But, the police actually apologized and offered to pay for the medical treatment of these injuries
that's
and
nice.
the camera, which obviously doesn't make
An apology, if it's a nice apology, means the world.
Well, the interesting thing about that is, while the apology doesn't mean too much, in the United States, usually when you hear about a case of police brutality, the police will deny wrongdoing, and they won't pay for any kind of property that was damaged or any kind of medical bills that were incurred. It's pretty rare to see that in the United States. I'm sure you probably wouldn't see it in China either. It's just that with the games coming to the country this week, they probably want to put on a good face on it, as good a face as you can put on beating journalists.
Well, beating journalists is never a good thing. So, once again, thanks that we live in the United States where we have a freedom of the press, at least, but they're really not doing their job, and even if they were, we don't always treat them the best over here. So just because we're downing on China doesn't exactly mean our government is all that great and grand over here either. All right, Nick, but speaking of government, what's going on in Washington, D.C.? How are the big government goons doing over there, and what's Downsized D.C. going to do about it?
Well, Downsized D.C. got a big response when they send out their email updates to their email list, which you can sign up for at downsizeddc.org. They tend to send out ways that you can contact your representatives about particular bills that threaten freedom and increase the size of the government, try to get those repealed, and get legislation passed which will try to ensure smaller government and more limited and constitutional government. Well, they got a big response to their campaign against Real ID this week. In fact, so many people started sending letters to their congressmen and their senators that some people were actually having trouble getting messages to go through. They didn't quite crash the server, but the website couldn't keep up. Apparently, they're adding like 2 new servers sometime in the near-term future to try to keep up, because the site is growing and Downsized DC has grown a lot since it first came about. But there was such a big response that it was overwhelming, and they're looking to that as a way to maybe fight back against the warrantless wiretapping bill. Unfortunately, FISA made it through the Congress, and there is already going to be a lawsuit that's going to try to challenge the constitutionality of the new FISA bill. Of course, the ACLU is mounting that, but there is going to be a grassroots strategy where everyday people like yourself can get involved, and that's going to be done with Downsized DC through the American Freedom Agenda Act, which was actually a compilation of legislative ideas from both progressives and some traditional conservative groups. Some of the highlights of what the bill would do is repeal the Military Commissions Act of 2006, which would restore the right to habeas corpus, and it would end legal torture by the U.S. It would also restore the FISA bill. Actually, what passed was a FISA amendments bill. So this would go back to the surveillance court that we had prior to 9/11 and prior to some of the changes that were made. This would also make it illegal for government agents to kidnap people for rendition to other countries where they can be tortured, and provide legal protection to journalists who want to expose illegal or unethical conduct on the part of the federal government, even if it's in a sensitive area. And that's among other things. There are some other provisions to the bill, but people really have gotten organized regarding Real ID. A lot of Americans are getting involved, putting pressure on their, well, not necessarily representatives, since they don't seem to be representing most of the American people. Over 90% don't approve of what Congress is doing, but they are elected officials. So Real ID was one area where the American people are getting active and trying to get these politicians to rein in the power of the government, which isn't easy because politicians tend to want to expand government power.
Well, it's good to hear that they're doing something, letting the Washington folk know that they don't agree. Personally, I don't see much use for the federal government anymore. It seems that they do much more harm than good, hurting many, many more people's lives than they're actually helping. So I I don't know that we need the federal government to be sending these messages to, but as long as we do have it, I guess Downsize DC, really simple, easy way to get involved and help let your reps, I guess who you call them, know what you think about certain issues. Even if they won't listen, they do send you back a little piece of paper saying that they read your note. It's probably a form letter, and they probably did not read your note, but hey, at least you're having your voice be heard.
And even though they aren't actually reading your letter, the impact that's made isn't that they're going to have a change of heart on an emotional level from reading your letter. Pretty likely that's not what's going to happen. But they tend to be updated by their staff, who the staff is usually the ones who actually have to, send out the form letters. They tend to keep tabs on where particular pieces of legislation, where the responses are. So how many people are encouraging them to vote for the bill, how many people are urging them to oppose the bill. And they do weigh that. I mean, they're politicians, and they tend to see which way the wind is blowing before they cast a vote. So even if they're inclined to grant the federal government unconstitutional powers, they don't really want to do it if it's going to cost them votes and possibly cost them their seat next time around.
Right. Well, check it out, downsizedc.org. All right, when we come back, we are going to be talking about one reason you should not be trusting the government, federal government, or local government with your personal information. Real ID is one reason we shouldn't be trusting our information. It would be completely a backwash. We've talked about it many times. I'm sure we will again, but it can get worse. We'll be back. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Thank you, Spencer. This is Mark Edge from Free Talk Live, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
All right, before we were talking a little bit about Real ID, weren't really getting too much into it, just briefly covering what Real ID is. It would basically let the federal government be in charge of all IDs. The states would still issue them, but the federal government would decide which information could be put on it: DNA, fingerprint, social security number, whatever the federal government wants, they get. It would also create a huge centralized database, so any hacker or someone who really wants to get their hands on your information could not only get your information, but get everybody's information. So that's one reason Real ID is bad. But here's just a couple examples. We're going to be getting into some articles about why we shouldn't trust the government with all this information. A lot of people think, well, it's the government. What are they going to do with my information? Personally, I would never trust them with it. But some people, well, they have made this mistake. A lot of people have been flying since 9/11, and you know about the big lines, the security checkpoints, the security theater, as some like to call it, the TSA harassing people to get through, even though, well, they miss most bombs that actually go through, at least in test results. They're not really doing much except putting up a good show for themselves. But some people don't like waiting in their lines, and they've voluntarily given up all sorts of information: their names, their addresses, their mother's name, maiden names sometimes, all sorts of information about themselves so that they can zip right through the security checkpoints without having to be searched and go through all those invasive procedures. Tempting on one side, because really, who wants to be patted down by some big old bubba who might as well work at McDonald's? I don't want to do it. But I also don't want the federal government to have my identification for many reasons, including this one. Well, it seems they have lost a laptop containing 33,000 names, information, all sorts of personal information about everyone who went through this fast-paced line. They since recovered the laptop, so they tell customers, have no fear, the laptop was stolen, but whoever stole it returned it. It also turns out that all the information on this laptop was not encrypted as it should be encrypted. It's just out there to the open. So all you have to do is open up the file. Oh, look at this. I have the names of 33,000 people, all the information I could ever need to know about them to steal their identity and do whatever I want with it. This is what the government is doing when they have your information. Government at work. One of the many, many reasons no one should be trusting their information, their personal information, with the government. What do you think, Nick? Would you go through the fast-paced line?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't give up any more information than I had to, because this happens quite frequently. It's not just the TSA. I know that the Veterans Administration has done it too.
They recovered the laptop. It's okay. They recovered the laptop, and they think They don't have any information to prove this. They think that whoever stole it probably had a change of heart and brought it back without compromising any of the information. Because they say, while they're going to be alerting people that this happened to, they're pretty confident that nothing bad will happen and their information won't be, their identity won't be stolen.
Well, an identity thief tends to not want people to know that they've stolen identities, because then you can actually put a fraud alert on your social security number. You can take steps to make your bank accounts more secure. So they don't want you to know that your information may have been stolen. So maybe they had a change of heart, but if you're actually good at stealing identities, you probably know that it's better that people not be aware that their information's been taken, so they won't take steps to protect themselves, and they won't be looking at their credit card statements to see if any unusual purchases have been made. Because a lot of times identity thieves, you know, they aren't going to go and empty your entire bank account. They might just charge off $5 a month, because most people aren't going to notice that.
Yeah, and when you have 33,000 credit cards to charge off $5 a month from, well, that's a significant amount of money. But what if you're a lazy identity thief? You don't want to go through the trouble of having to go and steal a government's laptop. Well, because that's a lot of work. You could get caught about it. How about just logging onto the internet? Because if you don't want to steal a government computer, well, don't worry. They just post the information online. This story coming from Maryland, where Maryland, the DMV was actually posting social security numbers as well as other information online. So not even trying to keep it a secret. If you got pulled over in Maryland, no matter which state you're in, they post all the information that's on your driver's license on a database so anyone can go and view it. Well, a lot of states give the option or used to require people to put their actual social security numbers on their driver's license. I believe federal regulations now say that it's optional for people to put their social security on driver's licenses. Why anyone needs to do that, I have no idea. Apparently they just trust the government a little bit too much. But people's social security numbers just posted up online, their names, their addresses, everything on their driver's license for anyone to look at. I mean, if you're worried about the government stealing a laptop, losing a laptop, or having it stolen with your information on it, well, they're even more incompetent. They're actually giving it away for free. When I first read this article, I thought it was from The Onion, a fake news source or something, because how is this possible, Nick?
I don't know. They're the government and you're not, and they can do what they want. For the most part, that's
But they tell us to protect our identity all the time. They say it's important to protect your identity. Don't let, like, you're supposed to rip up all your junk mail and put it in separate trash cans or shred it and stuff. And meanwhile, they're posting your social security on the internet for anyone to look at.
Yeah, well, it's not their social security number, so they don't really care, do they? I mean, you think they could at least, even if they wanted to post a driver's license, which I don't really think is necessary, couldn't they just take a small piece of paper and cover up your social security number, or you know, obscure it somehow so that anyone who wants to type in the web address and look through the driver's licenses couldn't just take the information? I mean, your address and your name, those two things are pretty well linked. I mean, if you're listed in the phone book, people already can figure that out about you. But when you're talking about social security numbers and some of the other identifying information, like we were covering with the information on the laptop, like mother's maiden name, things like that, that's information that if it gets taken by somebody who wants to misuse it, it can make your life very difficult. I know people who've had social security numbers stolen, and it's not fun. I mean, not only can they charge up a bunch of money to your name that can take a long time to try to get clear, it's still your social security number, so you have to be very careful for years and years afterwards, basically forever, or change your social security number. So it makes things very difficult. Especially
if you want to get a loan or something, go out and actually use your credit, it makes it very difficult. So one more reason, if you are someone who was on the fence about Real ID, well, this is what the government does before they even have it all in one big centralized database. This is what they're doing when it's all over the place, scattered about to different states. If states can't handle it, well, I'm definitely not going to trust the federal government, which is an even greater bunch of buffoons than the state governments with my personal information. But if you feel differently, if you trust the government, want them to have all your information, we would love to hear with you and why. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email, fmtv@freemindstv.com, or you can leave us a message on our talkback line, 206-350-0123, 206-350-0123 is the way to get in contact with us. Well, we're not done. We have more coming up. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Stick in between segments of our show.
Okay, I can do that. Hi there, I'm Russell Canning, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And as always, welcome back to Free Minds TV, and as always, it's Nick here with you.
And Toby.
And this episode of Free Minds TV is brought to you by Life Productions, a Keene area company dedicated to providing video production services.
Yeah, Life Productions, and thanks to Nick from Life Productions for actually also helping out on the show tonight a little bit as well. And also, we're going to be getting right back into the news, though, Nick. You've got the next article. What's going on here?
Well, there are new microchips in your passport. If you've gotten a passport since last fall, you may not realize it, but new RFID chips, radio frequency ID chips, have been added. And there was a time when people talked about spy chips, and it was generally paranoid theory or science fiction. But today, they're prevalent, and they're out there in your passport, for one thing. These new microchip passports were designed to be foolproof. They were designed to be unfakeable. But they can be manipulated and cloned in minutes and accepted as authentic by the software that they actually use to monitor these things. Tests for the Times, this from the United Kingdom, exposed security flaws in microchips that were introduced to protect against terrorism and organized crime. The flaws undermine claims that 3,000 blank passports that were stolen last week, I believe that's in the United Kingdom as well, were worthless because they couldn't be forged. If you don't have the information on the microchip, what the government was saying was, well, nobody can fake that information. In the tests, a computer researcher cloned the chips on 2 British passports and implanted digital images of Osama bin Laden and a suicide bomber. The altered chips were then passed as genuine by passport reader software used by the UN agency that set standards for e-passports. The Home Office has argued that fake chips would be spotted at border checkpoints because they would not match certain codes embedded in them, their key codes, that are supposed to be used for e-passports. But only 10 of the 45 countries that use these e-passports actually use that key protocol. So for 35 countries, you can actually program a fake passport. So,
and even more, once the hackers figure out how to program whatever, hackers can do whatever they want. They're the same people who write the information. Well, there's other people that can write over it and do whatever they want with it. I mean, what? I just have to wonder what is going on here. What are people thinking when they're trusting the government with all their information? We just went over stories about how the government can't even is posting people's social security numbers online, and now we're supposed to trust them with RFID chips in our passports that anyone can steal. Is it identity thieves who are working for the government to craft this kind of stuff? Is there the goal to create more identity thieves out there? What's going on?
I don't know, but you know what? With Real ID, the Real ID Act, going back to the domestic policy in the United States, something that would affect pretty much everybody watching the show, anyone with a driver's license in a state that's going to comply. The Real ID Act doesn't specify that this RFID technology would be used in Real ID compliant IDs, but it's believed that they probably would add it, and it's something that's being considered by the Department of Homeland Security if they actually get their way and implement this program. So it's actually not going to be foolproof at all for domestic driver's licenses.
So I could just, if I had a reader and I was a hacker and I could break through I'm sure it's real secure, I could break through their stuff if I'm one of those knowledgeable person with computer hacking skills. I could walk by you, scan you, and pick up your information that you have?
Yes, and to be honest, I don't think that you'd have to be a hacker. I'm not sure what they would do for security features on a Real ID compliant state driver's license, but the impression that I get is that you could simply read the chip with an RFID reader, which I think you can get some at the consumer level for $600, $700, something like that.
Walk by 3 or 4 people, it's paid for.
Yeah, you can generally pick up the signal from, depending on the reader, 100 feet away.
Not to mention that the government knows where you are at all times too. So even if you're not concerned with identity thieves, the government is tracking your whereabouts as well, and the government has all this information too. And based on all the stories today alone of how incompetent they are, that doesn't make me feel too easy.
No, I think you will see, if that gets implemented, a lot more identity theft. It makes it easy for them because it puts all of this information in one place. And to be honest, all you would need is one skilled hacker, one person who left a laptop with the files on it in the wrong place, some bureaucrat they went out to lunch and they left their computer out. That's all you need, and theoretically you could reveal the entire database, which is everyone with a driver's license in the United States. Fortunately, there are a few states, actually I believe the number's up to something like 17 states now.
It's growing too, and there's a whole bunch more that have legislation on the table ready to go through. So lots of states opposing real ID. Right,
there are about 17 right now at last count. They're saying they won't participate, or they're putting up serious resistance to participating. So I think we could get to a point where over half the states aren't going to participate anyway. Is that really going to make much of a difference at that point? I don't know, but I think at some point the feds are going to have to repeal the Real ID Act.
But we'll still have to deal with these pesky little RFID readers that make us vulnerable to the government as well as to identity thieves in our passports. So what do? Do you smash it with a hammer, put it in the microwave? What do you do to get around this RFID? Because it doesn't make me feel comfortable having something that any scumbag can come up and read, know all my information, know everything about me, have that on file just by walking by me now. It seems like I'm a sitting duck.
Yeah, well, the passport, it's required that the chip be in there. But if the chip malfunctions after it's put in, I don't believe there's any requirement that the chip be working for you to use your passport. What I've heard is that the chips are fairly sensitive. They're very tiny chips. I've heard that dropping, say, a textbook on it, or perhaps putting it in the microwave, either one of those will fry the chip or damage it enough that it won't work anymore. So if you don't want a microchip in your passport, and you're going to be applying for a passport from today on, or you've gotten one pretty much in the last year, it's probably a safe bet that you have a microchip in your passport. So drop something on it.
Yeah, oops, that was a mistake. All right, well, that's just going to about do it for us. If you have a different opinion, I'm sure many of you do, we'd love to hear them. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email, or you can also visit us online. freemindstv.com is the website. From there, we have all sorts of archives, video shows, the radio side, Free Minds Radio, which is live every Sunday from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as well as ways you can help the show, help become a show sponsor. If we're not on in your area, you want to get us on your cable access show, well, help us out, just like Renee did this week, getting us up in the Lakes region. Help us out. You can email us, fmtv@freemindstv.com, if you'd like to do so. Well, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night.